Hi, and welcome back to Braver by the Day. Josh here from Albury, Australia. For today's show notes, go to braverbytheday.com/29. I'm super excited about this episode. I had the chance to talk with Mike and Izabela Russell from Music Radio Creative about the influence of radio past and present and what the future might hold. Just an interesting chat about how Mike and Isa moved into working for themselves as well, which happens early in the conversation. It was just such a fun chat. I actually had to edit out some of my giggling and laughing from my side of the conversation because it would have been a giggle fest otherwise. It was just such a fun and lively chat. So I won't hold you guys up too long. We'll jump in now with Mike and Izabela Russell from Music Radio Creative in the UK. So I'm here with Mike and Izabela Russell from Music Radio Creative based in the UK. Today we're talking about a really interesting topic, and that's the influence of traditional radio, so AM and FM radio, tune-in radio, past and present. So everywhere from the 50s onwards we'll probably be discussing in some form, I would imagine, up until the modern day. And I just thought for my audience it might be good to get a bit of a background on yourselves as a couple that have been involved in radio and now own your own business, Music Radio Creative. So can you give the listener a bit of an idea of your past in radio, particularly Mike, I guess, and then how you were working behind the scenes, Izabela, as well, on building the Music Radio Creative brand out? And maybe if you could just let us know a little bit about your time in Australia too, because I think that plays into maybe how radio has changed, that people don't necessarily have to travel around the world anymore. So take it away.
Well, first, Joshua, may I say it's an absolute pleasure to be invited to come on your podcast, and we're delighted to be here. I heard you mention the 50s in that little intro question, and I just wanted to let the listener know that neither of us were born in the 50s.
Sorry, I misconstrued your age.
But radio has been around since, the 50s and way before that. In fact, the first jingle was around since the 1920s. So there's been a huge influence over the decades and the years. We'll do our best to go back. So a little bit about my background, I guess, first of all, then I'll sort of let Izabela come in because you like to do that. I was in radio since an early age. It had been my dream and my passion to be on the air. And also I'd been interested in jingles and sort of audio and branding and making things sound great. Ever since I listened to Capital FM in London, which was, the biggest station in London when I was a kid. So that's how I got into it, listening to the radio, listening to the DJ sounding great, and just thinking I want to do that. And I worked in radio all over the UK. I travelled loads, as is the case with a radio job. It even took me in 2001 to Australia, where I went on air in northern Queensland, actually, in a town just south of Cairns called Innisfail, doing the breakfast show on 98.3 Cool FM. There you go for your Australian audience. And that was great fun. Being a token pom on the air in Oz was pretty awesome. And Innisfail being the size of town that it was, the accent tended to get recognised quite a bit. So that's the fun of radio. I've been addicted to it since an early age, and now I'm privileged to work with people from radio, podcasters, DJs, businesses that want to sound great as a part of Music Radio Creative. And with my lovely wife, we kind of make a good combo, don't we? What's your background, Isabel?
Well, we do. Before I will go into my background, perhaps I will explain a little bit as to what we do. As Music Radio Creative, we create unique sound to radio stations, podcasters, business owners, and DJs. As for my background, not really radio related, but I do have an excuse. My background is in banking, but what I bring to business is just the business side of things for Music Radio Creative. Radio people tend to be very creative and very focused on what they do best, which is radio, but they do forget about all of those little things that business brings.
Well, all of them. That's a sweeping statement, isn't it?
Well, not all of them, but from experience and people I've met so far, that is the case.
All radio people have no business sense.
No. It's not about being in radio. It's about the fact that as a creative mind, it's good to focus on what you do best. So be it being a presenter or, if you're a painter, painting, or, anything that is creative, you focus on what you do best, and that's what you should do.
And what about your experience with Australia, Izabela?
Been there once. We travelled all across.
For our honeymoon.
For our honeymoon. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Loved the weather and very jealous for it.
That's excellent. Thanks for that. And just as a caveat, I guess, maybe just to defend myself, the reason I brought up the 50s, Mike and Izabela, was because I guess that was the start of the advertising age. So if I misconstrued your ages, I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you have a bit of a history with both Australia and you're building a reputation and a brand, I guess, in the United States as well with Music Radio Creative, which we might jump into in a little bit. But just for my audience, before we jump into the major topic, what were those last few years of radio like, particularly, I guess, for you, Mike and Izabela, because you would have been observing it from the outside? Was it obvious that you were going to move away from traditional radio and into your own business? Was there a little bit of fear involved in that move? As I'm assuming from what I've listened to all of your episodes, you haven't mentioned that you had another business of your own beforehand. And was that a clear path, do you think?
Wow, Joshua. One word to sum it up, tough. My last years in radio, the last few years, tough. And I think Izabela would go along with that. Like I said at the start of the podcast, I've always wanted to be on the air, working in radio and doing that. But I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur, and I think Izabela has realized that since you've known me. So I've always had these crazy ideas, tried these things. I've been selling my voice online since back in 2004 to some degrees of success, but never to the level that we now both do together with Music Radio Creative. So I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And I guess working in radio in my last years, it was kind of tough, I guess, working for someone else who said you should do it like this or like that, and feeling like, I don't want to say feeling like I knew better, because that sounds very, but, I could see that this, podcasting was really on the rise. I could see that new media was the way forward. And it frustrated me when I could see that many radio stations weren't doing it right. They weren't getting their social media right. They were putting YouTube clips up, that were boring, that maybe in some cases didn't even have visuals. It just had like logos. And Izabela wants to chip in.
I want to chip in. And I think I would like to go back a little bit to your first radio days, shall I say. I think that Mike has always loved radio. I mean, this is a little bit embarrassing perhaps, but his mum shared with me little videos when he was 13 and pretended to be a radio DJ in his bedroom. So he did have that radio nudge from very, very early days. And I think it was his passion. But being creative and entrepreneur, if someone really tries to pin you down and tell you this is how you do things, you don't do things this way, you do it just like this, is very much, distractive to your creativity and everything that you do. So being on radio and hearing that all the time, because that's what radio does to modern presenters in many, many cases, you're just constantly being told, okay, this is how we do things. So you record for 2 minutes or 1 minute and, you just come in between the songs with a link telling listener that, you've been listening to Adele or whatever it is. And that's it. And there is no room or space for personality and for being you. And I think that's what really killed that love for Mike, and he moved to being him.
Although I would say there are still some gaps, even in today's radio, for good personalities to shine. A good example in Australia is, I don't know if you're a fan, Joshua, but Hamish and Andy.
I know of them. I've seen them I watch most of their TV specials. So
yeah, but it's very much a rare thing to have that personality come through. And I think that really has been the reason why Mike moved away from radio into something still associated with radio, but with more freedom attached.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for that. That's a good background, and that might segue well into the big topic of the day. And that's, Mike, do you think that traditional radio, as in AM and FM tune-in radio, might have lost some of its influence on a mass scale now, as in regards to consumer behaviour, politics, pop culture, and maybe even music now? Because I don't know many people that look to traditional radio to get their music taste sorted out for them these days.
Well, I think that it is a really tough question, and I don't think there is a straightforward answer. Firstly, you need to look at the listeners. Obviously, there are wide span of ages and demographic groups in general. And I think that older generations will still tend to turn towards radio and listen to it in the same way they have been listening for years. However, when you look at the younger generation, you see that people started using apps like Spotify or internet, YouTube in general, so many different channels for discovery of music. So that part, I think, is slowly moving away from radio. People tend to discover music where they want to, not on radio, whenever it's played. So that's one part to that. Now, another thing is obviously the radio personality that used to attract many listeners, and well, it still is attracting many listeners to the radio. However, the longer we go into the future, the less of those personalities are out there. Radio stations struggle financially; they can't afford to hire good talent. Very often, they don't sound professional. They just hire people off the college or whatever other spots, and it's just losing that special touch it used to have.
I'll make a bold statement here, and I'll say any AM or FM radio station or streaming station that goes via TuneIn or other various platforms that relies on music for its future, music policy for its future, is a dying radio station. It has to rely on content. It has to rely on the personality. It has to rely on the speech elements. Even FM and AM radio, which is transmitted locally to local communities, has to rely on its content that is locally focused. So if you're relying on music and playlisting going forward as a radio station in the traditional sense, you're in trouble.
Wow, that's pretty powerful, mate. And thanks to Izza there for filling out that background.
No worries.
Do you think that, maybe just in regards, because my show, I guess, is about behaviour change and that kind of stuff, and every so often I just have guests on that I'm interested in speaking to personally, so this is one of those more selfish episodes for me, I guess. And radio's become such an interesting thing to me because I guess being a podcaster, you can kind of see the future of influence a little bit through podcasting, which I see fading a little bit in radio, because I don't know how you guys find it, but I find less and less people in my life that look to the radio for their consumer behavior and stuff like that, to find out what the best products are or the best services are, and what maybe even just as far as thought leadership, I don't see so much of that on radio in Australia. Is that the same, do you think, in the UK, that in maybe just to synchronise all their activities as a business, they might have stripped out the personality for the sake of cost?
I think so. I would definitely agree with that. And with the consumer behaviour, even all the ads that you hear on the radio, they are played so often. Yes, you hear them, and perhaps you will find out about certain service in your local area through the radio station. But majority of people, I'm guessing, would listen to radio in car. That's probably still the most common thing to use in a car, because not all the cars have all the modern plugins to, plug in your iPhone or whatever else you're using. Not yet, but so that would be one place, I guess, where that would still be effective to some degree. But then on the other hand, you could say, and I know that's the case, many radio stations struggle to find paid advertisers. So it's not always even possible for them to play content that's relevant to the audience, which obviously loses on the effectiveness of that advertising, because if the radio station has listeners who are aged mainly 50 plus, and then suddenly they have an advert going on about a nightclub in the area, the effectiveness of that advert is going to be close to zero.
And that's the beauty, I guess, of podcasting. That's certainly why we podcast, is because it's just a fantastic way of reaching people directly that you want to connect with. It's kind of like your primary people you want to target. And never a week goes by when we don't get, an interesting comment or an interesting bit of feedback to each episode we do. And I would say that the kind of feedback we're getting to the podcast is not as much as I used to get when I was on the air presenting radio shows, and you'd get 100 texts in the space of a 3-minute song, to win a competition. But the quality of the feedback you get is amazing. I mean, we get listeners, I'm sure, as you've experienced, Joshua, that will write you an essay just talking about the latest episode and the things that you spoke about. And for someone to do that, I mean, that's the why do you podcast question. I'd ask you that, Joshua. You do a fantastic podcast with really interesting guests, but apart from the fact you get to speak to interesting people, why do you podcast?
For me, to begin with, I started with a music show, I guess, and really it was just so I could articulate myself better and form my ideas more clearly, I guess, when it came to music, because my old record label kind of screwed my old band over, for the lack of a better term. So I was pretty angry about that. And really it was just a cathartic experience, really, just to get it out, put all of my ideas out there into the world so no other bands got messed around. But now with my new show, Braver by the Day, I think I can see the value in speaking directly into people's ears. Even though my audience is small and is growing, I still know the power, because I've experienced it myself, of having someone you trust in your ears without any other intrusive content, whether it be heavy advertising or breaks or things that radio might suffer from, where if they're going into a deep piece of content, the conversation has a time limit. And that's the reason why I first got into podcasting, I guess, was because I knew that the conversations could be fully realized. And you are right. I mean, I've had some amazing guests, and they're not famous people. They're just normal, everyday people with great stories. And I guess I just sit here with goosebumps half the time, so I guess that's the best part. I don't know if that answers your question to me very well.
It does. It's amazing. And I mean, that's the beauty of podcasting, isn't it? That you can just go on and you can talk about what you want for as long as you want with no restrictions. I mean, Izabela and I had this conversation, didn't we, about radio stations doing podcasting, and they're chopping out all the records just to get the content that's in between the records. And you find out of an hour's worth of content, you maybe got 20 or 30 minutes worth of good content. The rest is advertising or music. I mean, you got quite heated about that, didn't you, Izabela?
I did, yes, because in my opinion, it's not real podcasting. Podcasting is about creating that good content. And sadly, not each radio presenter is able to create good content. If you take out all the music and leave all the bits where they speak, it's sometimes, it's just going from one piece to another, and that doesn't make any sense. But going back a little bit to the question about podcasting, in my opinion, people listen to podcasts and they make appointment to do that, whilst the radio is just something you play for the convenience of, having something playing around, whether you clean or cook or drive in your car, for example.
The other thing I forgot to mention with podcasting, if you tune into a podcast about a particular topic, you're generally, if the podcast is of a certain quality, going to get an actual authority on whatever the subject is, and they're going to bring on people, if they're an interview show, that are an authority on their particular niche or area of thought or whatever it happens to be. You very rarely, I think these days, would get a really well-informed, well-educated, super intelligent radio presenter like in the past, where they may actually have known about really, really in-depth subjects across a broad range of areas. It just doesn't seem as though that's the kind of radio presenter that radio is hiring now, that super intelligent, know-it-all sort of type, for the lack of a better term. It just seems to be just everyday folks that, as you said, they're just pulling them out of college campuses or whatever it happens to be. Whereas when you tune into a podcast, I find you're going to find a subject expert, whether you agree with them or not. I guess that's a different thing. But do you guys find that maybe the type of person that is on radio isn't the same as what it used to be?
Yes, I think that also potentially people on radio now lack proper training. I think that perhaps 20, 30 years ago, people probably radio stations invested in those individuals, and they have actually trained them to be those on-air personalities. I think that now you would find it really hard to find a radio station that does that for the presenters.
Many radio stations, I mean, I'm sure it's pretty similar in Australia with some of the brands you've got there, but many radio stations now are branded to just hit certain major demographics. Like in the UK, we've got Heart and we've got Capital, and those stations are designed just to do the job. They're tightly formatted, hitting that demographic with presenters that can just about hold it all together. But I mean, the BBC still does interesting stuff. They've got some interesting talent. But I think what you said, Izabela, about new talent and training new talent, that is a big worry. And I still remember the way I got into radio, which was, first of all, listening and thinking, wow, and then volunteering at my college station, at my local hospital station, which for our international listeners is actually a radio station inside a hospital that you can volunteer at and broadcast at, and doing all of that, then working at my local radio station for free, working my way up the ladder, learning from those with more experience than myself. I mean, people ask me sometimes, how did you learn audio production? I learned by being in a studio with other audio producers telling me you do it like this and like that. And I think I worry how that's going to continue in the future. I think the future of it may be YouTube tutorials. It may be podcasting and trying it out, but whereas in the past you could make all your mistakes in a little radio studio, record it, and if it was rubbish you could throw it away. Now you're publishing it on the internet.
Well, the other thing that actually comes to mind is we had recently a conversation with radio coach Robin Banks, and he said that not many people actually realize that being a radio presenter there is actual art and science to it, and not many people invest time or energy to actually work on that science and discover it or money to discover it further. And I think that, you know, he had a really good analogy, and he was saying, okay, well, if you are going to be a doctor, you are going to spend a certain amount of years at the university trying to be that great doctor. But not many people anyway do the same with radio. You kind of think, okay, yes, I've got it, so I'm going to give it a go, and oh yes, I sound quite good, that's brilliant. But then they don't invest any time to actually learn the science behind it. And he had a lot of really good tips as to how to be that great radio presenter and what makes a great radio. And I think that the training part there, you know, that little switch to make someone realize that actually you do have to, you know, commit some time to be a great radio presenter, makes that difference that we are seeing now.
I completely agree with you. Obviously, I've never been in radio, but obviously, if you're not prepared to put the time in to school yourself in whatever your discipline is, you can't be great at it, I guess. So
absolutely.
And I mean, just as a side note, that's probably a nice little business idea for you guys to move into in the future. a bit of radio trading. So I guess I've got a two-part question now, leading on from what I think we've set the scene pretty well for this. If radio has lost some of its influence in certain demographics, I guess we can put it down to that. I think we've agreed on that today.
Absolutely.
Where do you think those influences are coming from now, and where do you think they will come from in the future? So I'm talking about thought leaders here, I guess, people that can shape culture in a certain way, in a powerful way that maybe radio could in the past. Where do you see those people coming from in the future, or are they already here in podcasts and YouTube channels and that sort of stuff?
I would definitely say podcasting. I mean, it's just such an amazing way to connect with people, and working on with so many podcasters over the past few years, I've seen how they've changed and how they've progressed, and what they've become, and they truly can touch other people in ways that I think we've never seen before.
That's a very good question, Joshua, and I think it's a difficult one to answer as well, because I don't think that podcasting is there yet. And I know, Izabela, I thought you would actually disagree with me on that.
No,
there are a very small, select few amount of people who listen to podcasts. They're smart people, they're early adopters, they're new media fanatics. And while the people that do listen to podcasts and feedback on podcasts are really good quality and have really good things to say, I don't think you can have mass appeal yet with a podcast necessarily. I mean, would you go along with that, Izabela?
It depends. I've seen and I've worked with podcasters who do have that ability. But I think Joshua asked for the future, and I think that certainly the way the podcasting goes. But let's not forget about the internet in general. People become someone in a day from no one. Thanks to YouTube channel, some video on there, and they build it from there. Facebook is another way. So I think we are at the stage where all of those things change, and that shift of power is about to happen.
Big style. And with regard to music discovery as well, I mean, Joshua mentioned, being in a band and trying to get discovered. I mean, in the past, it's always been radio. It's been, we got to, really, take the head of music out at the radio station and, give them a really good time, because then they'll play our records and stuff like that. And, record companies would constantly be calling the radio station, telling about the new up and coming hits and bands. Well, now I think we're getting to the stage where record companies don't really care about radio anymore. They're kind of like, even we had this conversation. I'm trying to remember who it was with, but it was along the lines of, do you want to send your music to a radio station? No, not really, because I've got SoundCloud, I've got Spotify that I can be on, all of the social networks. And I think places like Spotify, Rdio, Deezer, all of these music listening, I mean, even Apple are getting in on the app with iTunes Radio. They're doing that for a reason, because this kind of medium, this way of listening to music is the future of music discovery. And, I get push notifications. I'm on Spotify Premium now. And every time a new track comes out, I get a push notification about, new album from Katy Perry, new this from Lady Gaga, and it comes straight to my phone, and you can start listening instantly. And that's where the power is for music discovery.
That's awesome. I completely agree. And all the young bands that I talk to, don't really have a focus on radio, because to them they've grown up, I guess, in a time where there hasn't been a powerful enough personality or group of personalities on the radio to pull them there as fans first, to actually understand even what radio's power is or what it was. Have you guys noticed that some people just don't even realise maybe how powerful radio was in shaping culture in the past?
Absolutely. And I think that definitely younger generation now is growing up not even having that much of a connection with the radio. I mean, I'm just thinking about she's only 2 years old, but she's going to grow up and she's not going to listen to radio because we don't have radio on at home. She's going to be listening to the music we choose to play. So she's definitely not going to have pretty much any touch with radio.
I agree.
Yeah. So, and I think it's already happening, I mean, obviously she's 2, but there are kids who are 10, maybe 13, 14. They may have not had that experience at home either.
Completely agree. I don't have a child myself, but I have 10 nieces, and I haven't. I've never heard any of them ever listening to the radio. So.
There you go.
Just to finish up today, I guess, first, thanks to Mike and Isa for making the time for me all the way from the UK. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's pretty amazing to feel like you know someone on the internet, which, if anyone, I know it sounds like we're geeking out on podcasting a little bit, but that's the medium, I guess, and you can't help it.
We love it.
Yeah, it's just amazing to listen to someone and then to actually get to connect to them and find out that they're a real person, which I think in other forms of media, I've never had that connection where you can really get to know the people that you trust and that you come to like over time.
Definitely.
So yeah. I just wanted to say thanks for joining me. And did you just want to let the listener know where they can find you guys online, and maybe just a quick recap again on what Music Radio Creative does as a business, because we didn't really jump into that too much.
Well, Joshua, it's been an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast, and we've really enjoyed it. It's just, it feels like fun sitting here having this conversation.
Is, and I was just going to say that you made us feel like we are in that nice and warm Australia once again.
I try my best.
So, well, what do? We work with DJs, radio stations, podcasters, and business owners.
Pretty
we help them sound great.
Anyone who needs audio. So, we create audio. We work with musicians, singers, voice artists,
audio producers.
And they stitch all the elements together
to make high-quality audio.
Yeah. So that's us. And if you are interested to see or hear more, head to musicradiocreative.com.
That's one place, musicradiocreative.com.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you guys so much for joining me, and thanks for both making the time. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to both of you, because you have such a great dynamic now with the show between the two of you. So thanks for joining me.
Good on you, mate.
Us.
Thanks, mate.